Welcome back, everybody. Left Reckoning. David here, as always, joined by Matt Leck. How are you doing, brother?
I'm doing well, David. Sweating my ass off, I must say, but that's the only time I'll mention it.
You could not complain to me about heat, friend. It's like 107 outside. But it's 82 degrees inside my house right now, and it's like it's bad when you walk inside and you're like, oh, it's so nice and cool. And it's like 84 degrees.
It's 72 outside. It's very 60 something inside. The sun is shining. I'm gonna go stare at the ocean and think about why my life doesn't suck when I'm building.
I might need to Wisconsin. But as much as I'd love to just have you on to talk about the weather, we're joined by our good friend Jason Myles. Jason Myles is a writer, a musician, and one of the hosts of the excellent This Is Revolution podcast. Thanks so much, Jason, for joining.
Hey, it's always a pleasure to be here. I love you guys like play cousins, and Pascal and I talk about it all the time. You guys have a great program that we actually watch and learn something from. And I do love the Marvel universe of left podcasters where we all get to spin around on each other's shows. And, you were recently on Varn's show, and, I was mad at Derek because I think he might have got the better of you. So I was like, fuck you, Varn.
I had fun.
Just kidding.
No, and speaking on that, pretty soon, we'll maybe announce it a little bit later, but there's going to be more frequent collaboration betwing Left Reckoning and This Is Revolution coming up in August. But
yeah,
let's wait.
Have you ever heard of Jetsons Meet the Flintstones?
Well, who's who there? Are we the Flintstones?
Well, can I ask you guys this? Mm-hmm. To the Left Reckoning patrons and any of This Revolution fans. My birthday, I decided I'm going to add a movie night. We do a more educational movie night. Pascal usually picks the movie. I've been picking the last two movies. They're not that educational, and the one I'm picking is not educational. But for my birthday, I'm going to start adding a fun movie night. And if you guys are around, August 19th, I turn 45.
Wow.
And I would love to watch with a bunch of people I know and don't know, Ninja 3: The Domination.
Sounds fun.
Ninjas, a little bit of The Exorcist, and a little bit of Flashdance. So all that in one movie is a recipe for fun, and I would love to share that with the Left Reckoning patrons.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah. Well, just a couple of quick shout outs too. People should definitely check out Jason's piece in Sublation, Rodney King, the LA Riots, and the Perils of Police Reform. It's a really excellent piece. But today we're here actually to talk about a video essay that you can also find on the This Is Revolution channel called We Don't Need Another Hero. And Jason, maybe to just sort of kick this off, why do we not need another hero?
I was dicking around on social media, and from that police reform piece, which was months in the works, there was a lot of different chapters in my brain and a lot of conversations I had with Teray Reed, Pascal Robert, and Cedric Johnson about this idea of hero worship. And what I'm constantly seeing on this still very young left that we have, I don't really put the start date like a lot of people during Occupy, because I think that was such a different time. And socialism was still a bad word. So where you might have had people that were teetering on socialism, or even maybe been socialists, you had also had a ton of anarchists, anti-vaxxers. It was
Ron Paul boys were there too, man.
Ron Paul was actually still a thing at that time.
Yeah.
My little brother wanted to vote for Ron Paul. And so there's an idea that I have this thing. I was also reading the Alpha Bunga Bunga book again. The end of history. And there is a marriage we still have to the idea of bourgeois liberal democracy and representative bourgeois liberal democracy. And that if we get the right technocratic solution or right technocrat in office, then great things will happen. And Bernie Sanders, in my opinion, was one of the first people in a long time on the political spectrum, Bernie and Trump, to kind of break kayfabe, political.
Could you explain that for folks who might not be
kayfabe is like pro wrestling, so it's the idea that we never tell you that this is fake. We never tell you this is scripted. When I say my name is Jammin' Jason Johnson, and I got hoes in every area code, you don't know that I have a wife and kids behind, and I'm a quiet man, and we're all friends. It's the illusion. And I feel that those two guys did an awesome job at breaking the illusion, but Donald Trump, much like the person he learned from, Vince McMahon, in wrestling, when how the sausage was made was shown in pro wrestling, he doubled down on the Mr. McMahon character, much like Trump building more walls, very nice people, kind of doubled down on all his rhetoric. But if you really look at how he governed, A, he was very incompetent, unlike Vince McMahon, but B, did anything get more messed up than it was under Reagan, Nixon, insert Bush Jr., insert Republican administration here. But even with Trump and Sanders, people had this fascination that one of those guys was going to fix all of their problems, which is fascinating to me because we also know that it's all kayfabe, it's all fake, but still we want to find a representative. And I started thinking about, because I also saw this in the world that we exist in doing left media. And what I find interesting is that there's people that kind of base their worldview on a show. I like Jimmy Dore, and Jimmy Dore says this, ergo I say this and believe this because he's telling the truth. He's going to lead he's going to lead us all to the truth. Okay. I saw something similar in the apolitical 80s with figures like Morton Downey Jr. I know I'm a little older than you guys, and I'm sure you guys don't remember Morton Downey Jr., but I believe I opened up the show with some clips of him and talk shows. And talk shows during this time actually started taking out game shows and soap operas that weren't doing very well. And Morton Downey Jr. actually had a nighttime talk show, and it was actually based out of somewhere in New York or New Jersey. But he grew up a Democrat, actually knew the Kennedy family very well, came from money. His dad was a performer, Downey Sr. He tried, didn't make it. But when he did his show, you could say faux populism, but he was to the far right of people like Ron Paul when Ron Paul would come on his show. And he would have left figures, but this is still the era where left figures are looked at as kind of washed out hippies that are overly idealistic. And he would even be to the right of Republican figures on his show, but young people loved it because he was their hero. But his show lasted actually a very, very short time. And then he was kind of replaced with Jerry Springer after a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that for people who haven't seen it, there'll be a link below for people to watch the essay. One of the things that you're really building off of in this video essay is like a media criticism, and how it's not just like, oh well, this figure came about at this time. It's reflective of the world around them. And the Jerry Springer bit that you make the argument that like you can't untangle this from Bill Clinton's war on poor people.
It's beautifully,
and you know what, we're gonna have to do something
aligned.
We're gonna have to do something, Jason. Just like I'm having this experience now too, where it's like some of our younger audience might not know who Jerry Springer is, so we might need to let them know what that program was about too.
Jerry, I think if you know Jerry Springer now, you might look at it as cliche, but you have to remember at this time we're not used to seeing fights on stage. When Geraldo had the fight on his stage, that was a legitimate fight. But that started to become part of the shows. Let me get kind of a bit of a right-wing black figure, a black nationalist, i.e. Roy Innis. He made the rounds during this time. And let me get a legitimate Klan member, Nazi in one of the Metzgers. I think maybe dad was in jail or something at the time, so the son was making the rounds. And those guys are going to fight. They're going to fight. And they're not fighting over anything ideological, if you ever listen to the shows. It was just name calling.
Mm-hmm.
So now racism is just name calling. And racism is the end all be all problem, right? It's not poor people. It's not public goods governance. It's not cutting back of these programs. That was never part of the conversation. It was always the savagery of white people, and black people are tired of the savagery of white people, until, kind of like Rodney King, and the conversations changed a little bit. But there's still this need for people to have a hero to get behind, to believe in, because we're not talking about people having their own power. Mm-hmm. And as I was putting the show together, or the documentary together, I knew I wanted to end with that clip of Michael Brooks in the time he got to speak with Cornel West. Mm-hmm. I've never got to speak with Cornel West. There's a few things Pascal and I have been able to do. There's a few things I've done in my life outside of podcasting where I go, holy shit, my life's dope and I do dope shit. And I know when Michael did that, or I believe in my soul when he did that, he probably came back with, holy shit, my life's dope.
I can vouch for that. Yeah. And we'll play a little bit from that that you cited in the video later too.
Right, because he got a chance on this stage to not only share thoughts with people that he appreciated, but he got to really share this main thought that I think you guys were really getting into more in the show, which was the idea that systems are the problem, not people. Mm-hmm. And that's where the hero worship gets really bad, because you're looking for, you've said this to me a long time ago, David, you're kind of setting yourself up for fascism. It was a conversation you and I had before I even had Pascal on the show. When you first met me, we were talking something about George Peterson that has always stuck in my head. Right? Huh. And so this idea, this people-powered idea that you guys kept talking about, I felt we have to get back to. But a problem with that, and here's almost a contradictory rub, is that sadly that man passed away. And when you pass away too soon, you become a martyr. Maybe that's not what you're looking for, because you want to remind people that before you went, the goal was that we have this power. Mm-hmm. Don't look for another me to help you, right?
Especially when, going back to like what you were saying, like the lessons in the argument really was about, smashing down that feeling of, if only we have the right guy in the right place. And I think that a lot of leftists in our movement are pretty good with that in other contexts. But even with the Bernie movement, I remember like the "Not Me, Us," slogan, which was a phenomenal slogan. Everybody would hear it and they would say, "Not me, us." It's like, that's a great slogan, and like Bernie cares about us. And it's like, no, Bernie was making the argument. It's like, if I get in power, I'm going to need y'all to do a lot of stuff to make this happen, right? And I think, again, like the messaging was great in coming up with that in the first place, but I do think there was a bit of a disconnect between that. It wasn't just like Bernie acknowledging you in the same way that, when you're a famous musician, you say, thanks to the fans, because I wouldn't be here without the fans. He's literally saying like, no, like if I become president, I'm going to need y'all to be organizing and doing street actions and pressuring politicians to make sure that we can overcome this system. And like, I think it becomes really clear when you compare that moment to some of the darker times, like in the 90s and in the 2000s that you do in that clip. In that essay. Because like the point is with Jerry Springer is like Jerry Springer is happening out of war on poor people. Jerry Springer brings up people who are sort of eccentric and like have bad behavior or something like that to be like, see, those are the poor people we're talking about. So even if you are a poor person who is being targeted by Bill Clinton, there is that like separation that's like, oh, that war's not on me because like I pay my child support and I don't smack people on live television, right?
I'm not trans. Yeah, all that shit is part of Jerry Springer, and The thing about when I say Sanders and Trump break kayfabe, Sanders, this is the first time we're hearing a politician seriously running for a big office like president talk about the power of we. Mm-hmm. And what's frightening to me, and why I do these video essays, and why I love doing cross streams with you guys, why I read all these damn books, is because we live in a hyper commodified society where when there is good ideas and good sloganeering that we think is going to build a movement, it then gets modified before we know it. I was just reading an article in Business Insider that kind of effed my head up about the fact that people are getting terrorized because they have 2-letter Twitter handles. And I don't know if you guys know this, there's a secondary market for Instagram and Twitter handles if you got on early on when Twitter and Instagram debuted in South by in the early aughts. A lot of these people worked in tech. They're like, oh, sure, the name's, DG, at DG. Right. Well, at DG means you've been around since the beginning. You're you're a true dude, this OG. So if you become an influencer and buy your followers, you can buy engagement. Mm-hmm. I don't mean likes, I mean literal comments. You can make it look like with DG, at DG, you've been around forever. So what you say is the truth. DG sells for tens of thousands of dollars. Mm-hmm. And these people didn't want to get off their handle. They thought it was a joke. And a few of them got swatted.
Jesus.
So living in this hyper commodified world where you and I, we see that slogan as, this is it, we're going to go build off this. And there's not as much building as we would like to see. There's people that are like, well, I'm going to take this and use this for my campaign. If it fails or not, I just came up on all this campaign funding dough. Most of it didn't even come in from my district. Mm-hmm. It's a scary time. And I appreciated the always sobering analysis of the trifecta of Leck, Griscom, and Brooks.
Yeah, I there's a couple things there. One is how much Bernie's slogan there just contrasted with like Hillary, which was ready for Hillary, or Elizabeth Warren's was she has a plan. It's like they couldn't have been more like wrong. Like what are we doing here, right? But the other thing I wanted to just circle back to is, you talk about this current influencer culture and how you still see things on TikTok that have like the form of information. And to trace that back to the closer to the source, how you do with how these shows develop, like as a media studies graduate, like that, I really found that interesting because talk shows to me, like Maury Povich or Springer, were like when I would be home from school, like fake and sick, and it was like a window into like adultness, and it seemed like I'm getting an adult education now, but it didn't have like but it was more interesting to find like the early bit of that was newsmen or journalists. And so you brought like the form and sort of condition people, because one thing that I always try to remind people is like corporations that are involved in news business, they're selling you the feeling that you're informed. And that's what they don't want to break. They don't like what informs you. That's too philosophical of a question for anybody who's in those executive offices. They want you to feel like you're being informed. And like how that has been weaponized against people and how they can understand the world. And like you said, and we can get to a little bit how that played hand in hand with tough on crime stuff or blaming people for their poverty. It's scary how like natural that seemed to come about. Like I'm curious at the time, did you recognize like how this was sliding?
If you think about, and I do this a little bit more on the last video essay that's out now about police violence, throughout the 80s, or when I grew up, and I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area in a city called Richmond, California, which was really, really violent. People always want to talk about the crack epidemic. I was there. It was scary. My younger brother's first memory is of me grabbing him and sitting over him because some kids that ran a crack house, and I say kids because we were all about the same age. I was like 12 at the time. We're trying to shoot a stop sign, kitty corner, and they didn't realize that bullets don't stop. They really didn't realize it. They were kids. So we're getting shot at. That's his first memory. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't remember, thank God, when he was learning how to walk and the drive-bys would happen and we'd have to grab him. He'd get on my skateboard and when I'd be honest, grab him and pull him down. That was reality. So what is the news? The news is going to double down on that. But another reality, especially for people in Southern California, not so much from where I'm from, is police brutality. They were raising houses in LA. Rodney King is what you saw. If you watch the movie Panther, the first one that came out in '95, they actually talk about a cat that got killed in my city of Richmond, California. And the scene where they're protesting is you see my mama house by the police station. And there's a reality that the police violence never stopped, right? The Panthers are a reaction to a reactionary police force. Gangs necessarily aren't their reaction to a reactionary police force. It's a whole other conversation. But the talk shows definitely went in hard before Rodney King on this idea that the inmates are running the asylum and there's nothing we can do about it. And what made it more different than we see today is that the conversation was, well, we just need to give out tougher sentences. People like Ishmael Reed were saying things like, you need to give a 13-year-old drug dealer a life sentence. You wouldn't hear those things today. But as I say this, June 20th, the year of our Lord 2022, Chesa Boudin gets booted out of office and he has aversion programs. So people of Latin descent don't get deported. So people are getting thrown in jail for property crimes, what we call quality of life crimes. So the difference is, if you really want to have some sort of like comparison between the times, is there was a menacing fear of young colored people shooting up the neighborhood. The music didn't help. As a fan of it, that shit didn't make it better. It literally gave them the poster to be like, see? And that's what you saw over and over again until Rodney King. And after Rodney King, the conversation changed drastically to the overzealousness of police. And then you get, the Boys in the Hoods movies after that bring it back to point of hand.
How conspiratorial do you get when you think about how conscious the media makers are in curating these sorts of messages? I remember being a little bit paranoid after Trump won and Taylor Swift comes out with a song called "Look What You Made Me Do." I'm like, this is very on the nose. Like, I don't know. Like, and I'm probably being ridiculous when I say like they're actually like Lear Cohen or whoever it is getting together, say we need these messages of violence and whatever sort of suits us in this media. Or do you think it's like, I get the Chomsky method of like certain messages get selected? I'm just curious how you think about those things.
As someone that sat in quite a few rooms when it comes to like major festivals, picking talent, I've been around it. It has more to do with money than it has to do with like.
That's scary too. Like how reliable like this stuff, because you talk about like the crime stuff in the 90s, but then you have like Sam Harris in the 2000s. Like it's just basically like doing the legwork for why am I thinking about it should be okay to torture Muslims now? Oh, because, right? Like it's crazy how reliable that sentiment is and media is.
Well, I mean, look. Music ain't changed that much. Cats are still rapping about being cartel members and drug kingpins. What's happening to them now? They're getting hit with RICO charges if they're really serious. These cats ain't really serious. A lot of them. And as someone that did numbers, they don't really do numbers like you think. First of all, their fan base can't drink. Venues don't like that. So there's a reason why you don't see the little, Gumdrop, whatever the fuck their name is, headlining stuff like Coachella. You're always going to see more established bands that bring older people because they need drinkers, and established older bands actually, or groups. The numbers we saw during Beyonce were record breaking. They fell off drastically the next year, like 20% drop in numbers. Yeah. So, nostalgia really does sell. I don't really buy into the whole conspiratorial aspect of it, because I saw Warren G, Snoop Dogg, and E40, all guys that are in their 50s, turn the party out and almost shut down certain areas of a festival because it was people were losing their mind. Old motherfuckers was losing their minds, right? The Froze booth at Bottle Rock went crazy with those guys. So they get more of those people. You want more. Why is Metallica still selling out arenas in their, as a fan of the group, they look almost like grandmas at this point, but they're still selling out. Rolling Stones.
I think you're definitely on it about like the fact that like the music hasn't changed in the sense that like, if they were trying to make the argument, for example, in like the 90s and stuff, that there's a 1-to-1 because music is so violent now that this is why things are getting bad. I think that's a really good point to make, that it's like that hasn't actually really changed. But like, I think that this hits on a point that, you make in the video too, where it's like, this is exactly what happens when you look at society, and society is big, it's confusing, and it's scary. And you try to deal with and absorb all of that information on a personal, individual, psychological level, right? So it's like there's violence because the kids are getting too much violence, in their media, right? Or like, we need to be coming at, social programs in this country because this person didn't pay the child of Jesus Christ, the mother of their child enough in child support, right? Like it becomes all this kind of individual stuff. And I think it's really encapsulated when you bring it back to politics, where, Bush after 9/11 is saying they hate us for our freedoms. And you notice like, it's not imperialism. It's not all these other big structural issues. It's a personal, individual, psychological thing where people are sitting somewhere else seething. And like, it's obviously BS. But the reason that it pops up in the 80s and in the 90s and in the 2000s and today is that it's very easy, I think, especially if you've been enculturated and educated in the United States for so long, to think about things on that level. So it's like the message and the package is going to change for the times, because people are just, I think you're also right that it's like, it's not that the media is like, oh, we're going to get them and we're going to come up with this kind of thing. They're just people trying to think who are stupid, you know what I mean? And they're going to go for the quickest version of it that they can come up with that seems like some sort of grand narrative, and present that as the answer. And it really gets back like to what I think is like the focus and the thesis of the video essay, which is like, that is a dynamic that is really bad for analysis and very useful for people in power.
It protects kayfabe. If I can, I want to tell you guys a quick anecdote, a true story that just recently happened to me. If I have time.
Yep. Go for it.
Okay. I went to a high school outside of Berkeley, California called Albany High. Sports was not very big in my high school. It wasn't a performing arts or anything special high school. It was a regular high school. It's just that where it was located, there's a lot of ex-hippies kids. I literally went to school with Country Joe McDonald's son. A lot of ex-hippies kids, right? A lot of ex-Panthers kids. It was a very interesting high school. So we didn't have a lot of sports rallies, if at all. I don't remember one. We definitely had multicultural day. And remember, 44, this is in the 90s. There wasn't a term called woke. We had multiple clubs for the LGBTQ. It's very different high school I went to, I think. And so at the end of Multicultural Day, a guy I knew who was actually always very nice to me in school, a white gentleman. He was always really helpful. When I first came there, I was very lost. I remember I come from a totally different world. We had computer science together, and I would be stuck, and he'd always turn my cheeks and shit. Nice guy. had his issues like most kids in high school do, trying to figure out who the fuck you are. And he kind of found that if he was brash and offensive, which was the style of the times, Howard Stern is the thing. Radio DJs at this time are very mean. Comedy's really mean. We are the kids that grew up with Sam Kinison and Andrew Dice Clay. At the end of Multicultural Day, and the whole school walks out. No, it also was a small school. Walks out of the auditorium, and he says something along the lines of, "Why don't we ever have a white people history day?" He got punched, and then probably about, I'm not trying to be over exaggerated, maybe 20 people beat the shit out of him.
Jesus.
Beat the shit out of him. He hit me up 2 nights ago. He's been watching the show, surprisingly.
Wow.
And he says, "Hey, Jason, do you remember when the whole school jumped me?" I said, "Yeah, I don't like to bring it up." And we've talked off and on throughout. And he lives in Austria, doing very well for himself. And he's been hitting me up because he hit me up like 2 weeks ago. And he goes, "Jason, how do we get these kids to read more Adolph Reed, man?" So anyway, sorry. He hits me up, and he's telling me about what he can remember. They beat him unconscious. I mean, I thought they killed him. And he says the reason why he got mad was because one of the speakers during our Multicultural Day was on some race reductionist, Europeans have ruined Latin culture kind of shit. And he didn't appreciate that. He wanted to say something about it. It was dumb. He regrets it to this day. But ultimately, he reminds me of what he can remember of the story. And he says that after that happened, the San Francisco Chronicle ran an article on him and said that he yelled out white power and did a Nazi salute.
Oh, wow.
After that article ran, someone got his phone number. Again, this is before the internet. You're just in the book. They had his name. He was a minor. He was in the book. They called him, and someone said, "Good job. We don't want these wetbacks in our town."
Jesus, yeah.
He screamed and hung up the phone, and he tells me, he goes, "Jason, how do we educate these young people on Marx? Because I believe in the U.S., we need socialism more than ever now."
Yeah.
Man.
It's a true story.
No, and
That's
it's
wild.
like, I don't know, not to get too misty-eyed about this kind of stuff, but like, I think it's a very helpful thing that there's a lot of options and information out there for people who want to get, introduced to, some of the ideas from Marx, some of the teachings from Adolph Reed, Michael, Cornel West, right? Because one, because it'll make a better world, and two, because those monsters on the other side, like, are organized. You know what I mean? Like, somebody goes out of their way to like call a young person after a story like that.
Mm-hmm.
They're there, and it's really important. And I think it's been a really beneficial thing over the past few years that we've been able to build a very visible kind of network out there for people to like learn other things. Because the right has always sort of been waiting in the shadows for something like that to give you a book or a pamphlet or a phone call or whatever.
Oh,
Well,
yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's wild, just the mottos you're talking about, though, that sort of like led him to that. Like Sam Kinison, you mentioned, like those kinds of guys. Like, I mean, I may be lucky that I based my sort of when I was looking for a personality, and as like a sophomore in high school, I started watching the UK Office, and I'm like, I'll just be Tim. I'll be like a quiet guy that's secretly ambitious, but like make just like funny comments on the side, and then that's how you get the girl. You don't have to be like, yeah, like what's the other guy?
You've nailed the gym. He ends his story. He ends his story, and he says, "Jason, and if you don't believe me, I can show you guys the message." He says, "Jason, I moved to a more socialist country, and I see the benefit. And I think that when we were in school, when you and I were in school, we never learned about Reconstruction. We never learned about these socialist movements. And because we never learned about this," he goes, "Dude, I went to visit Lenin. My kids learned this in school."
Oh, wow.
And he's upset People at my high school to this day still think that he's this horrible racist man that, wanted to kill all Negroes. And it was further from the truth. But I found it fascinating that once you see that a better world exists, you come back to, where you're from. And you're like, well, we can change this. And even now to some of his peers, he's a bit of a weirdo.
Yeah, that's a fascinating little bit, and like I think the we there is important. Like we can change this. Jason, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. People should check out This Is Revolution. We'll have a link below for people to watch the video. Since this is the 2-year anniversary of Michael's passing, I figured it'd be worthwhile to share this clip that you have put in your video of Michael when he was speaking with Cornell West. Just before we go to, is there anything that you might want to say on it or share with us?
I do want to say this, and I'm sure you guys don't remember this. If you do, I would call both of you dirty liars. In 2019, I think there was some sort of call-in or message-in segment for your patron have. And I was on tour, and we were supposed to play Brooklyn. And I think you guys would have people come by the studio every here and there if they were from out of town. And I was really stoked to everybody wants to call me all of a sudden. It's so weird. I hit a message. I was like, hey, I'm going to be in Brooklyn. And Michael was like, Jason, hit me back, message me with your information, and I'll give you the studio address. So I was all stoked. We had planned that we were going to go to Brooklyn to go meet you guys. I was like talking about y'all in the van, and then last minute the headliner switched the show and we moved to Manhattan. And my drummer, who was from New York, goes, "Ain't no way in the world the motherfuckers is coming to visit us in Manhattan if they're living in Brooklyn, man. Fuck that." So I missed out on hanging out with you guys in 2019.
Oh wow! That's fascinating. I did not know that.
But we'll just have to make good in the future, brother. Thank you so much. We're gonna play this to close you out, but talk to you soon, friend.
Thank you. Peace, yo.
See you, Jason.
I just want to add that thank you, and it's an immense honor to be here, including definitely with Dr. West, who is an influence on me. And one of the major reasons that he's an influence on me is because of that synthesis and the ability to hold multiple truths. That we have to have some sense of a capacity here to do something with democracy, and then also not lie and deceive ourselves about what we are and what capitalism is and what empire is. I came across a speech fragment from Martin Luther King Jr. recently, which I played on my show, and I don't know where or the title of the speech, but I thought it was so important because we've put a lot of work, and we still have to put work into reminding everybody that the man was on the left. He wasn't a guy who came out once a year and said everybody should treat each other nicely. He was a serious... But the other thing that I loved about this speech, which was he talked about the fallacy that certain Christians misunderstood love as a ceding of power. And then Nietzsche came along and rejected Christian morality because he thought it was denying someone's vitality, the will to power in a healthy sense. And he said, love without power is sentimental and anemic, and power without love is abusive and corrosive. I'm paraphrasing. And that was when I saw it, I thought, well, here, okay, we know the left-wing Dr. King. Well, here's the Machiavellian Dr. King, and I love it. I want the left to have Machiavelli so that we can have the strategy, the ruthlessness, the clarity to actually win these battles and be ruthless with institutions. And then I want us to learn how to be really kind to each other, welcoming of a broad set, and actually have a movement that has the capacity to do that. That's why the cancel stuff is relevant that Katie brought up, because it's a stand-in for this eliminationism of other humans, which is neoliberalism enacted. And it's also a contradiction from when we get utopian. It's beautiful. We're the people who sit around and we say, how do we have a world where there's no prisons? Okay. That's a radical fucking statement. That's a real thing, and we should take it seriously. But then, on the other hand, oh, well, these people could never be part of our coalition because they made a mistake or said something. Like, it's a contradiction in what we're enacting. So what I get that I hope is in the realm of answering your question from this Dr. King clip was left-wing, spiritual, but also with a vision of power. And if we can synthesize those things, I think we will speak to the highest impulses of this country, we will be welcoming to people, and we will win.